Welcome to Dogs with Rich. I'm Rich, and this is the second video in a two-part series of how to teach your dog to come when called. If you missed the first video, I will put a link in the description so you can go back and watch it and then get caught up. If you have seen it, hopefully you've been practicing and your dog is conditioned to start coming when called. Because in this video, we're going to take it to the next level and take him to the park right after this. If you remember in the first video, we focused on teaching the dog to come when called by using the sound of the treats, getting them to come to us and follow us around the room while we're giving them the command come. If you're still struggling with this, go back and watch the first video because technique is critical. Watch the technique that we're using so that you can strengthen your coming when called. Because now we're going to the park. First thing you're going to need is a 15-foot leash. So these are called training leads. These are the ones that I like. These are 15 feet long. They have just a regular clip that you hook onto their collar and they move all the way down to a regular leash. If you don't have a 15-foot training lead, don't worry, you can pick one up at any of your local pet stores. If you don't want to get one, there's other options. If you have rope lying around the house, you can use this. Just make sure that you secure it to your dog. Another option, kind of a last resort for me, would be to use an extendable leash. Now there are some downsides to extendable leashes. For example, there's never going to be a lack of tension on the lead, so the dog will never feel like they're off leash. And the other thing is these are known for getting kind of wrapped up on us and then the dog's taking off and people getting either burns or sometimes even worse, broken fingers. So you can use this if you want to. I would save it as a last resort. I would use either a 15-foot training lead or maybe some type of rope or string. 15 feet is good. You can use 20 if you want. They sell 30 and even up to 50-foot training leads, but I'll leave that choice up to you. Now we're not taking our dogs just off leash yet. Couple reasons. One, we aren't necessarily confident with our recall just yet. And number two, there may be leash laws in your local area that you want to make sure that you look up. Once you get to the park and you get to the area that you're going to give them some freedom, go ahead and put them into a sit. Now keep them in the sit for a few seconds because they need to feel like they are earning this freedom and they're not just taking it. Structure is the key in dog training, so we are structurizing the release, and then once they're ready, you're going to say their name, then you're going to give them the release command, okay, and give them a command of go play or go sniff, something to that effect. Once you've released them, start off by giving them about 5 feet of leash to walk around freely. As you start to move around, if they get to the end of the leash, guide them back to you, encourage them, tell them what a good boy or a good girl they are, and continue to move around the park. Don't go in a straight line. You kind of want to go in different areas because we're trying to condition the dog to focus on us while they're enjoying themselves and that they're playing and they're sniffing. After about 30 seconds of doing this, you're going to stop. Plant your feet, start shaking that treat pouch, and call them. When they come to you, immediately go into a sit because we don't want them taking off, we don't want them running past us, we don't want them taking off as soon as they get their treat. Once they're in that sit, go ahead and treat them, give them lots of praise, but keep them in that sit, make them wait for about 10 seconds, and then say their name and release them with the okay, and then encourage them to go and play again. Then you start and continue to move around, and every 20 to 30 seconds, stop and repeat the exercise. The purpose of this is so that the dog understands that with this new freedom, as long as they come back to you when you call, you're going to release them again and that they're going to get this freedom back. If the only time you call them at the dog park or at the park when they're off leash is when it's time to go home, then of course they're never going to come to you. Continue to do this exercise around the park in an area where there's not many distractions. You really want to strengthen this coming when called, and as you do, you're going to start moving into more areas that have bigger distractions. For example, kids playing, people playing basketball, families having a picnic, and then this is where you're really going to start learning to challenge your dog as you increase the distractions. Once your dog is responding to you consistently, coming to you every time you call them, and going into the sit and staying in the sit until you release them, now we're ready to give them a little bit more freedom. So what you're going to do is move them now to about 8 to 12 feet and then continue and do the exercise again. And then work with the dog to get them to work at that distance. If the dog's not responding to you, start off with a little bit less leash, maybe 6 or 7 feet, and then start working up until you can get to about 10 feet. If you increase in too much distance, The dog will feel like they've got too much freedom and you may lose them. You want to incrementally build up your distance until you're all the way at the end of your 15-foot leash. So once we've got them on leash, now we're going to head to the park. Whether you drive there or just walk there, there's going to be a point where you're going to be walking into the park. You really want to make sure that you do a nice structured walk with the dog by your side, sitting every time you stop as you get to the area where you're going to give them some freedom. The reason why is because if we don't have good structure while we are walking the dog, what's going to happen is that freedom is going to go to their head and then they're not going to be listening to us. So we want to make sure that we do a very structured walk, get them into the mindset of training so that once we give them permission to have some freedom, they're ready to respond and still listen to us. Remember, dogs are like kids. If you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. So start off structured and it will make your job easier in the end. In dog training, we have the 3 Ds: distance, duration, and distraction. Those are the 3 things that we use for the stay command, but we're also going to use them for the coming when called. With the distance, we're going to control our distance with how much freedom we're giving by how long the leash is. The duration is how long do we go in between calling them. Start off with it being fairly frequent so that the dog is consistent with coming back, and then you can expand it a little bit so they get a little bit more time to play without having to come back to you. And then the third one is distractions. Distractions you're going to want to increase. Now keep in mind, as you increase different levels of the 3 Ds, you may have to reduce some on the other. You may be able to take your dog out to a quiet area of the park and get them all the way up to the end of that 15-foot leash and they respond perfectly. But then when you go over to where the basketball courts are and everybody's kind of hanging out, they stop listening to you. So what you need to do is slowly decrease your distance until you get to the basketball courts, but you're also going to want to decrease the length of your leash so that you go back down to maybe a 5 or 6, 7-foot leash. Once you've got them under that control around the basketball courts, move up to 10, then 12, until you can get to 15. Now I'm going to reiterate this because it's important. Remember to use structure. If you don't use structure, if you're not making them sit before you release them to make them earn that little freedom that you're giving them, if you're not making them sit when they come to you, when you call, they're going to feel like they have too much freedom and then they're going to start feeling like they're one of the decision makers. And if your dog feels like they're one of your pack's decision makers, then that means they get to make the decision about not coming to you. Let's say you're at the park now and your dog, like Millie, is about 15 feet away from you at the end of the leash. You're calling her and she's ignoring you. All we're going to do now, since we have her on leash, is give a little tug, right, to kind of snap her out of that mindset that she's in, get her to refocus on us, and then we're going to call her, shake the bag of treats. You're very excited for her to come to us. When she does come to us, we're going to act like she did it the first time we asked her to. Remember, we don't really want to have too much negativity with this right now, especially as we're training her, because we don't want her to think that she's in trouble when she's at the park, supposed to be off leash. So stay focused on your structure, give them that freedom, but really make them feel like they've earned it and they will enjoy it even more. Now, some of you out there are going to be saying, well, my dog won't sit for me. Now what? Well, the question is do you really have to enforce the sit? And the answer is kind of yes. And the reason is because if you, the pack leader, give your dog a command to sit and they don't, if you don't reinforce this, then basically what that means is they don't really have to listen to you because there's no consequences for not. So here's how you're going to make them sit. If you tell them to sit and you've got a treat and they still don't sit for you, you're going to use what we call in dog training the assisting technique. You put your hand on their chest, the other hand on their bum, and you're going to rock them backwards and down into a sit. Okay? Once you do that, good girl or good boy, and then you're going to praise them and you're going to give them their treat. If they pop up without permission, no, grab them, put them back into the sit. Remember, you don't want to push straight down because that puts negative pressure on their hips. That's why you want to kind of rock backwards and down, kind of like you're folding a chair, so they rock naturally into a seated position. If they keep getting up, no, sit. Good girl. No, sit. Good girl. No, sit. Good girl. You may feel like you're spinning the wheels, but keep at it and keep them in a sit for, say, 5 seconds, and then slowly build up until you can keep them into a sit for 10. As long as you're consistent, your dog will learn that they have to listen to you. All right, at this point, I hope your dogs are really doing well and they're coming when you call them. We have one final exercise that we're gonna do, or that you get to do in the comfort of your home. You just need 2 people. This is what I call the come game. Basically, what you're gonna do is you're gonna have 2 people, 1 dog, and make sure the dog is on a leash. What you're going to do is clip that dog onto that leash, and the first person is gonna hold on to the dog. Both of you need to have treats, and you both need to have the same type of treat pouch or anything that the dog recognizes as the treat for that sound that we talked about. The first person is going to hold on to the dog's leash, give them a treat. Second person is going to walk up to the dog, stick their treats in the dog's face, and then retreat about 5 or 6 feet. Once they do that, then they're going to call the dog. Remember, call the dog inside just like you would if you were outside, because how you call the dog is important, and we don't want a variation from indoor calling to outdoor calling. Once the dog is attempting to get to that person, the first person lets go of the leash and allows the dog to run up to the second. Now once the dog gets to that second person, they grab a hold of the leash so the dog can't go anywhere, gets the dog into a sit, and then they reward them with lots of praise and give them that treat. Once that dog is focused on that person and they've got that treat, the first person who started the exercise will now walk up to the dog, show them that they too have treats, and then they will retreat to about 5 or 6 feet. Once the first person starts calling the dog and the dog is actively trying to get to them, then the second person will let go of the leash and allow the dog to run over to them. Now it's important, if you're the person holding onto the leash after you've given them the reward and the other person is calling them, it is important that you ignore the dog, because the dog knows you both have treats and they might think that you're easier because you're closer, so you want to take your focus off the dog. Stand there, hold the leash, look away, and as soon as you see the dog is trying to get to the second person, then you're going to let go of the leash. As you continue doing this, you're slowly going to increase the distance between you and your partner. Getting the dog to run back and forth is going to become a game for them to see how fast they can get to the other person, grab their treat. Now as they do this, you're going to notice they're going to come up, grab their treat, and turn around and try and take off back to the other person because they're learning the game. That's why you want to grab that leash. As you increase your distance, and you're going to also increase your distractions. So one of the person can have a bouncing ball, right, while the other person is treating them. You can have another dog enter the room. You can have people enter the room. Be creative about your distractions until you build up to where one of the people, whoever's going to call the dog, ends up moving out of sight. Now it starts to become a hide and seek game. So while one person's holding the dog and giving them their treat, the other person goes and hides. Then they start calling, and as that dog starts to go to find them, that person lets go, the dog runs off, they find the person, and then they give lots of praise, lots of love, and they get their treat. Now, using the exercises you've learned in these 2 videos, your dog should be coming to you in no time. So keep at it, don't give up, and remember, condition is repetition. Repetition is key, and your consistency. Make sure you practice regularly. Have a little dish of treats on your counter. Every time you walk past it, pick it up, shake it, call them, give them a reward, and then go back to what you're doing, and you could get 5 or 10 good coming when called practices while inside your home during the day. If you're worried about giving them too many treats, you can substitute this exercise and use their dinner while you're doing this, either with their kibble or whatever it is that they have for dinner. Use this as their game, and then their dinner becomes a game. Now, remember, you can phase the treats out as you're progressing through your training. If you're working with a puppy, you may want to wait for a bit because puppies are very selfish and they kind of do things for themselves. Older dogs work and do things to make their humans happy, so you'll be able to phase the treats out a little sooner with them. As you start to phase the treats out, if you notice your progress is starting to regress, then go back to using the treats and then slow down the phase, or maybe wait a little bit before you work to phase the treats out. You want a consistent, conditioned response to this, and you don't want an interruption of trying to phase the treats out too early because it will interfere with your training. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this 2-part series. If you liked it, let us know in the comments. Please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you help support our channel so that we get pushed out to more viewers. Go spend time with your pups, and we'll see you in the next one.